All right. Welcome to another edition of Shabbat Lounge. This is Matt.
And Jake here.
And today we're doing more of Talking Torah.
Talking Torah.
And we appreciate you taking a minute to stop and check this out. And we're doing a new thing where we're doing the Torah Portions. And thank you for fixing that. And we're going to look at, how did you say it?
Vayer.
He appeared.
Yes.
Who's the he?
He is Yahweh.
Yahweh. It seems like it might be important.
Yes.
Then this one gets, this one could have a R rating.
Yeah.
For those of you with sensitive ears.
Yes. Hide your children.
Yes. No. There may be some things that you may not want them to know about at the moment, and you might have to educate them when the time is right.
Yes.
But this is Sodom and Gomorrah. A lot more.
Yes.
So
and there is a
sounds
lot
exciting.
More.
A lot more. And so Genesis, what is for some reason, I'm going to hide this. Genesis, what? 18?
18:1 to 22:24.
So that is where we find ourselves. So almost immediately in this story, we see there's a meal, there's hospitality. These people, these angelic beings, if you will, come to Abraham, have a meal. And Jake pointed out it was kind of like the Last Supper.
Right? They come and wash their feet and have a meal. And then, I guess that's where the similarities end, except for the fact that after that, something else happens, right? Mm-hmm. Which is Day of Atonement. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of you see this judgment happen, but first you see Feast of Trumpets kind of verbiage where there's this outcry.
You see mercy. There's mercy involved in the fact that Lot gets to escape, Lot and his family.
Yeah.
And so the legend has it that Lot preached in Sodom and he tried to convert the people, very similar to what you see with Jonah in Nineveh. But in this case, for Lot, it didn't work out like that.
Yeah.
So
they more affected him.
Yeah.
It would seem. And
you've got that we discussed. There's not really trumpets, but it's the concept of trumpets and the outcry. And there's this. It says in the text that he hears an outcry, and we don't know if that's the land outcrying for the blood that was spilt, or Lot's family crying out.
Right.
But I don't really think it's Lot's family crying out because they seemed a little reluctant to leave. It's not that you don't really get this in the text that they're like, "Oh, we're so glad you're here to save us." They're kind of like, "What are you doing?
Yeah,
we got to do what?
What's happening?"
Okay, what do I have to do that?
Yeah.
Does he really mean he's going to do that?
So it's not real clear in the text who is crying out to Yahweh to look over at Sodom and fix the situation, but it does say that there's an outcry and he hears it and reacts. So it's almost like there's this sped up version of the feast days and what they represent going on in this story. Yeah,
that's pretty fascinating. Definitely something to check out and research. And he talks along with that, the smoke of a furnace, was alluded to here, which all kind of fits like end time. It does seem like a model of end times apocrypha, where you have the Father coming and warning and trying to call his people out one more time before it's too late. Yeah. And then there's a moment when it is too late. And if you haven't listened, you're going down in flames.
Yeah. And there's only a small remnant that comes out of it.
Yeah. And you have this whole thing of, don't look back. We'll talk about that in a second. But, we call this the R-rated portion where there's this negotiation with Abraham, and he's like saying, he starts with a big number and it keeps getting smaller about, if you find this many righteous, and all the way down to a very small number. How many was it at the end?
I think it started with 50 and went down to 10.
Yeah. And so
they didn't even find 10.
Yeah. And which is interesting. It's another example of grace in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It's another example of Yahuwah listening to his people, listening to his servant, having compassion. And then you've got this whole creepiness of the angels and the men like pounding on the door. Let us have these men, for weird craziness, for sure.
Yes. They just wanted to know them.
Yes. Just wanted to get to know them. That's all it is. And, this is another proof text of there were people who wanted to have relations with angels. It's clear that there is something that, these people recognized, that these people that came to visit might be different, or it was just the custom. Either way, I mean, it's just lots of weirdness.
Yeah. And I think with the negotiation thing, I really like that part of it, because I see that as Abraham is really, he's not questioning Yahweh. He's inquiring of him. He's trying to figure out Yahweh's character here.
Yeah, he's learning. And then you have this whole terrible story, which kind of peels back the curtain a little bit on Lot, where he's like, take my daughters. They've never been with a man. And the whole time you can see the mother of the daughters being like, pow, pow, like, what are you saying?
You shut up. You shut up.
Maybe she probably didn't do that. That probably wouldn't have been cool at the time. But in her mind, she was probably doing worse to him at that moment. And the daughters are like, Dad, what is your relationship with your father like? Clearly, we're going to find out.
Yeah.
But it can't be good after you hear your dad say such a thing.
Right.
And maybe, you just, it's a bad situation.
Right. Well, I think maybe it shows how desperate people will get in the last days. Maybe.
Yeah, it's a great example of that. Yeah. And so you see the salt pillar thing, and, she's told not to look back and to leave it all behind. Another reference of, like we talked about with Abraham, like we've talked about before, about being mixed in with Babylon, and the Father calling us out to leave it behind. He doesn't want us to long for the leaks back in Egypt. And she was clearly going, hey, it wasn't that bad back there. And, turns around and the rest is history.
And the thought that, one of the daughters was left back. So it's you have a lot of things going on here. You have the idea of leave your family to go with where Yahweh wants you to go. You have the idea of
being called out, holy and set apart.
Yeah. And you have the idea of repenting, even though they're not perfected, right? As they're leaving Sodom, that's repentance. And there's no real punishment until you stop repenting and turn back towards Sodom, just like we see in Egypt.
And then you have another crazy story. This time Lot gets drunk like Noah did, and bad stuff happens.
Don't get drunk.
Yes.
Bad stuff happens.
And then you get the Moabites out of this, and you get this weird story where these girls, right after it happens, are like, it's the end of the world. There's no one else left to populate. We must do this. And it's like, how did you jump there so fast? Did you forgot you had a uncle out there named Abraham? And
you forgot that the messengers were telling you to go to the city, and you chose the mountains.
Yes.
Yes. So there's something there that
such a crazy story.
They weren't getting it.
Yeah.
Well, there's something there that we don't really have the whole story.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of ew. And this whole part of the story is just weird. Yeah. And then you get the whole thing with Isaac and Ishmael, the conflict with the mothers. It's like, duh. I mean, of course there's going to be conflict when it goes down the way it did, and these two mothers are going to have some issues.
Yeah.
And so, and Abraham is kind of like, whatever, do whatever you need to do. And so she does, and treats her terribly, and she goes out in the wilderness, and it says that Yahuwah, once again, he hears this crying out in the wilderness,
and he sends his messengers.
And he responds. He takes care of them. And I believe that he takes care of them mostly because of their connection to Abraham.
Yeah, it says when in the text that they're blessed because of Abraham.
Yeah.
It pretty much says that.
Yeah. So you have that happens. And then you've got, so that was R-rated. Well, what about human sacrifice? Is that R-rated? Probably.
Super.
And so you have this next, and you see that Isaac is willing. Isaac, at this point, it's debatable how old he is, but, I feel like he's clearly old enough to take down a 100-plus-year-old man. And yes, they age differently, but by the time you get to Abraham, the time span, his lifespan is much shorter.
Right.
And so
he could have at least outran him, probably.
Yeah, I'm thinking Isaac could have punched him or hit him where it hurts and ran away. And yeah, I think that would have been easy for Isaac to do, but Isaac shows his character that he was willing.
He's a willing sacrifice.
And he's old enough at some point to realize, wait a minute, because you kind of allude to that here, where you can kind of see Isaac's wheels are turning like, wait a minute, what's the sacrifice? Whoa, hey.
I see what you're doing here.
Okay, if that's what it's got to be, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the
ram.
There's a ram in the thicket, and so to me, if you do a study on thorns and their relation to sin, you see it in the beginning when they're kicked out of the garden. You'll plow the field, and the thorns you'll have to deal with. It all came because of sin. This is another example of the thicket is, if you look in the text, it's a thorn bush. And if you imagine a yearling ram just getting its horns and not really knowing how to, where its head can fit, if you've seen animals do that. And I just imagine this ram getting its head stuck in the thorn bushes by its horns, not antlers. And so it's like wearing this crown of thorns,
That's
obviously
good.
symbolizing Messiah. And like you were bringing up the burning bush situation.
Yeah, it's kind of like another burning bush kind of moment that seems significant in the life of Abraham for sure. And all I could think of was the kid that in the school desk that tries to stick his head through the little hole, and they've got to hacksaw him out.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's exactly what happened.
yes. Young bucks sometimes don't understand their limits.
Right.
We should say it's a good way to put it. So, and you do see this concept of the only begotten Son, and it does seem like a test that Abraham passes with flying colors.
Yeah, Yahweh says that after this, that because you were willing to offer your son, I'll offer my only son.
Yeah. So anyway.
Oh, one real quick.
Yeah.
So when Abraham turns around, I've heard this idea before. When Abraham turns around, it's the Hebrew thought of that is that when you look back, you see forward because everything's cyclical. Mm. So when he was looking back and seeing the ram in the thicket, he was seeing Yeshua on the cross.
That's good. There's a lot here, and there's a lot more than we're going.
Yeah.
Than we,
just hitting the highlights.
Yes. Trying to go through quick, and then where does this happen? It's kind of interesting. Mount Moriah. It sounds like Lord of the Rings, but
it sounds like some random area.
And so when you look up Mount Moriah, well, what do you know? You find out it's the Temple Mound
in Jerusalem.
And so right at, and just like Jake was saying, it makes sense that I know this could be weird for some of you who have never thought about this, but it very likely could be the spot where Yeshua is crucified and the blood drips down actually on the Ark of the Covenant, or on the Holy of Holies. So definitely some interesting concepts there, but there's no shocker that it would happen here,
right?
And way before any of this is here. So,
I think a lot of like early on when you're looking into this stuff, you don't realize Jerusalem was from way back then.
Yeah, Salem,
and it's it says Salem most of the time early on, and it just carries through.
And then it talks about the oaks of Mamre, and that's always been kind of interesting to me because in this story early on, you see lots of references to the oaks of Mamre.
Yeah.
And so here is a picture of what's supposed to be one of Abraham's oaks of Mamre that's really old, and they've had to support it and help hold it up. So it is kind of interesting. It's definitely a concept that I'm not quite sure that I understand what it means, other than it could stand for rest and refuge and protection, comfort. So I did find this funny cartoon about it. So I like how it says, like, do you smell smoke? No, but I smell salt. And then you have the pillar of salt here. And she says, oh, this was totally worth being turned into a pillar of salt for. Was it?
Was it indeed?
I don't think so.
Now, I know supposedly this pillar of salt still was up in the time of
Yeah.
Yeshua. And that's what Josephus says, and he says that he had seen this pillar of salt.
Yeah. Yeah,
So that's interesting.
A good visual reminder. So Yahuwah does have a lot of visual reminders like this for his people, and that's one you would not forget. And so this is kind of the area we're talking about. A lot of people believe Sodom and Gomorrah was down here in the bottom of the Dead Sea, and might even be part of the reason that, okay, so let's think about this. The lowest spot on the planet happens to be at the Dead Sea, probably where Sodom and Gomorrah was, and there was a giant explosion, and it makes sense that at a place where the earth swallows up a city, that it might be connected to the lowest point on earth.
Might be some sinkhole activity there.
Yes. So, and you can see the location of Mamre, Hebron, Shechem, all of in Salem. All of these are, places in the story that we've just discussed. So I think it's good to kind of look up maps and try to have an understanding of where some of this happens. The maps are always the thing at the back of the book that I didn't pay much attention to.
Yeah.
Actually, I did, because I'm kind of a map nerd. That's a lie. Maps. So, and here you see it again: Mamre, Hebron, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and you've got the Dead Sea over here on the right, and the ocean is on the left, if you will, on the map, and it shows you that.
Yeah.
And so then, this is just another map.
I like
zoomed
the fireworks
in.
here.
Yes, I do. Could you argue it's like a nuclear bomb goes off? Yeah, I think so. I mean, this was bad news. And it does say, incidentally, it rains what?
Fire.
And brimstone.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and we see that also in Egypt, and then you see it again in end time. So clearly there are a lot of end time references to this.
Yeah.
Things to, I don't want to be in that. I want to be rescued.
Yes.
And then is that it?
Yep. Looks like it.
I think that's it. So, once again, we're trying to do quick overviews of these Torah portions. They're meant to be kind of fast and furious. And we want you to go read these Torah portions and check it out. See what you think, and try to read it with an open mind. And anything else?
Nope. I think there's a ton of stuff in this Torah portion. So pay attention while you're reading through it.
Yes, there's a lot here. A lot more than we can do in the time we've allotted here. So
yeah. So if you like this kind of content, let us know, and give us a like and subscribe and all that.
Please share this with others. And thank you for stopping by to check out Sabbath Lounge.
I'll look.